Well, my name is Larry Bagley, and for about 20 years I served on the USPA Board of Directors, 8 of it as president and 2 as the chairman of the board. And then in 1995, resigned from the board so that I could take a full-time job working for Chris Needles as the executive director of USPA, who had been on the board from 75 to 80. We worked together. I was chairman of the competition committee for most of that time. He was on the board with me. And then for 16 years, worked full-time at USPA, most of it in Alexandria, Virginia, and the rest of it in Fredericksburg when they moved. And then retired from headquarters in March 2011. I made my first jump with the United States Army in 1963 after joining the Utah National Guard Special Forces in February of '63. The end of my 6 months active duty, went to Fort Bragg, made 5 jumps, and became basic airborne, went back to Special Forces, and within a couple of years went to OCS, got my commission, and became a second lieutenant. The 1964 U.S. Nationals, USPA Nationals, was hosted at Alda Airport, just up the road from where I lived in Salt Lake City. And my brother had made a couple of skydives, so I knew about skydiving as opposed to the military static line parachuting that I was doing. So went out in '64. By that time I had about 17 or so static line jumps, and I watched them jump during the Nationals, but didn't have the money to go through the first jump course and was getting my kicks doing the military static line anyway, so there was really no need. And then about April of '65, made my first sport static line jump, and it was so much fun that I continued and made my last jump in March 2001 at the World Paraski Championships in Austria. So I made about, 5,200 sport jumps, another 150 or so static line jumps, and retired from the military after almost 29 years as a major helicopter pilot, most of it Special Forces. During my time at headquarters, I was the alternate delegate for about 13 years or so, 11 years, and 6 of it served as the secretary for the IPC. Cindy and I, who's also my wife, was an active skydiver. She made about 3,500 skydives and was a judge and AFF instructor, camera person for the drop zone, because we ran a skydiving operation in Salt Lake City from about 1982 until 1995 when I went to work full-time for USPA. So she and I ran the drop zone, and between the two of us, the two of us together have been to 96 countries, most of it all to do with sport parachuting, either helping conduct meets or meetings, writing competition rules to conduct parachute meets. And so we've been virtually all over the world on behalf of sport parachuting. And as soon as I left USPA, I was invited to be a trustee on the National Skydive Museum's board, and have been doing that for the last few years, and presently serving on the executive committee as the secretary. I have 4 kids from a previous marriage, and every one of them had made 1 or more jumps. My oldest child, a son, made a couple of 100 jumps before he went off and started his family, and the middle daughter, Adrian, made about the same number of jumps, and she worked with us at the drop zone and helped pack and do demos and stuff like that, so she was really active with it. And the other 2 made a couple of tandem jumps and really didn't see the excitement in them, and besides that, they went off and started their family. So it's been a family deal, and we've really had a lot of fun with the deal. I'm really proud. Earlier this year, I was presented with USPA's Lifetime Achievement Award at their meeting in Las Vegas, and the entire family, all my kids and the 12 grandkids, were all there to see this thing happen. Half of the living previous honorees to the Lifetime Achievement Award were present, so it was a really great evening, a lot of fun, and really good time.
Why do you think, Larry, that skydiving is such a family-oriented?
Well, it was a way for us to be together on the weekends. Skydiving in Utah had a couple of drop zones that were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so you could take the dirt bikes out, or the dune buggies, or the ATVs, and have access to the countryside and make your picnics and have evenings around the bonfire, and then the next day kind of share that excitement. And so we really had a lot of fun. And then going out to the competitions, it was kind of fun to let them meet and see the big time skydivers in places like Muskogee and Tahlequah and Richmond. And so we really had a great time. And it is a camaraderie sport. There's a lot of good vibes that are going on, and there's a good feeling. And even though we don't jump now because we're so busy with the grandkids, we're going to a football game or a dance recital or something just about every weekend. They still relate to the experiences they had growing up on the drop zone, and later when they were making their skydives and going to the parachute competitions and that stuff. It's still really a major part of our life. Like I said, the Lifetime Achievement Award was a great combination of those exciting times all together with a lot of people that they've known and grown up with, some of their heroes in the sport, like my heroes in the sport.
Could you tell us a little bit about your heroes in this sport?
Wow, it's hard. In 2007, Cindy and I were named honorary Golden Knights at the Golden Knight reunion in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and it's impossible walking through that room and seeing at that time the pillars of the community like Jean Paul Thacker and Spider Wren and Coy McDonald and Dick Fortenberry and Bruce Wicks and Bill Morrissey, Kurt Curtis, all of the team members that have been such great ambassadors for the United States as they travel around the world, either doing demonstration jumps or winning medals at the international competitions in places like Russia and China and all over South America, all over Europe, Germany, Italy, Austria, the Czech Republic, England, Sweden. So it's like I said, to see these guys that pull their pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of us, still end up being these unbelievable pillars. Jim Arender, first world champion in like 1960, Lloyd Bryden, to show up in Tucson at like the Pioneer reunion that we would go to in Tucson, and they had one in Salt Lake and Denver at Felicity. At Rayford, we had a really wonderful time mingling with these individuals. It's just incredible to see what they've done. And I wrote the contract in the relationship between USPA and Sage Cheshire that was hired by Red Bull to conduct the leap made by Felix Baumgartner when he jumped from the edge of space. So I got to work one-on-one with Joe Kittinger, who made the jump back in 1959 or 60, whatever it was. That he left the gondola at 102,800 feet. And once again, the guy is just, he'll drink with you, he'll talk with you, he'll sign his book. He just, it's hard to really name an individual or two because there are just so many in the community. Ted Strong, Bill Booth, Jerry Bird. We used to go up to Logan in Utah and jump with Jerry and the team, and Jerry's policy was that anybody that showed up, whether they bought the ticket or not, could jump behind his team, and you just had to allow him to make the first point because then it was just 10-man star. It was the first door on the right and the first star on the left. And as soon as his 10 people docked to get a time for the jump, then you were invited to join it however you wanted to. Grab legs, enter the star, whatever it was. And we'd go up there just to mingle with people like Jerry Bird, Mike Hearn, Jim Fonsbeck, Tony DeRosa, Pete Gruber, and just, and once again, you get down on the ground and everybody's packing and shooting the bull and telling war stories. And it's, Bill Dawes, another name that comes up. Bill Dawes is, I think, still got more jumps than anybody. And a lot of people are coming close, but Bill Dawes is one of my early acquaintances. He ran the Alda Airport after I got off student status and had my pilot's license, so he had me fly for him, and we'd go to different parachute meets together. And Bill Dawes is still one of those crazy wackos out there, but one of the good guys, certainly one of the pioneers of the sport. I was, as president of USPA, I was also president of the National Skydiving Championships Incorporated, which included just me and Al Kruger and Gene Paul Thacker, and to sit down with the likes of Gene Paul Thacker. I mean, if you couldn't possibly quantify the number of lives that Gene Paul touched in his lifetime, the kinds of skydivers he made, the kind of pilots he made out of those people, the kind of people he made out of those people, just unbelievable. But like Cheryl Stearns and Mark Gabriel. I mean, I was president of USPA when we hosted the World Skydiving Championships, the Formation Skydiving Championships, 1981 in Zephyr Hills, and Bill Otley, who was the executive director at the time, had a connection with the National Aerospace Museum, and Michael Collins was the curator at the time, so he invited Michael Collins to be the honorary president of the organizing committee that hosted the world meet in Zephyr Hills, and Al King was an employee, and so Al King and Mike Johnson, we were just introducing AFF to the world, and so Al King and Mike Johnson offered to take Michael Collins, who, as you know, was the astronaut circling the moon while the other two landed on it for the first time. They took Michael Collins up on an AFF skydive at Zephyr Hills out of the DC-3. I mean, here's this guy that's been to the moon and back and is now making a skydive in front of everybody at the airport in Zephyr Hills. It was huge. I mean, it's those kinds of experiences that you couldn't quantify, you couldn't put a dollar value on it, just unbelievable over the years. Scott Hamilton, he was president of USPA in 1979 and 80. And BJ was the delegate to the IPC. Bill Otley was the alternate delegate. And Jim Hooper was the owner of Zephyr Hills and wanted to host the world meet in 1981. And so when we went to the meeting in Paris and put the bid before the international community, we, as board members, were directed, and Bill Otley was the employer, were directed to abide by the bid that was approved by Scott Hamilton. And when we got to Paris, it was discovered that Jim Hooper, behind the scenes, was cutting deals with countries to try to get their votes so that he could get it. We were bidding against Brazil, I think, at the time. And so he was doing everything he could to get the bid to come to the United States, and was even cutting the price of entry. And so BJ, in his infinite wisdom, and Bill Otley, with his negotiating skills and expertise, finally decided that, knowing the personalities of the different countries, that if there was a deal cut to lower the price, that it would be less of a cut than Jim Hooper was willing to make, but it was still other than what Scott Hamilton had approved. And so we got the bid, but when the news got back to the United States and Scott Hamilton found out that it was different than what he had approved, he fired Bill Otley and B.J. Worth as a delegate, and for 8 months we went without a representation of the international community. But at the meeting where it was where it was disclosed. In fact, it was in Salt Lake City. I hosted the meeting because at the time I was living in Salt Lake, and once his decree was made that he had fired the two, I raised my hand and got a motion passed that said that decision had to be investigated by the Constitution and Bylaws Committee, because I didn't think that it was legal for him to just fire them without cause, and that wasn't enough cause. And so Scott saw that as a vote of non-confidence as his president, and so he tipped his name side over on the table and resigned as the presidency and moved down to the end of the table and handed the gavel to Chris Needles, who was the vice president. And it happened so fast that Chris wasn't sure what had happened. But even today, Chris declares that he was the president of USPA, however short that was. And it took about 2 days for the issue to be resolved. And so we went until the next board meeting before they reinstated BJ and Bill Otley. But that was enough reason for the board to see that this was probably not the best job for Scott Hamilton to be handling. And so after a 2-year term, I was elected president of USPA, and it happened on the first day of the meeting. And that night, about midnight, and Scott actually dated and timed his resignation letter, but at about 12:32 in the morning, he resigned from the board and slipped the note underneath my door and flew back from St. Louis to where he lived in Denver. And so the next morning, we found out that he was gone, that there would be no transition of power. We had two $5.5 million lawsuits filed by two skydivers from the 1978 DC-3 crash in Richmond, Indiana. Me and my team were on the airplane, ironically, that crashed on takeoff. And two members of another team sued USPA for $5.5 million apiece. So we had the two lawsuits. We had just been given the authority to host the World Championship in Zephyr Hills, and there was no transition of power. It had no folders, had no files, no indication of where we were, anything like that. Bill Otley did everything he could to help me in the transition. And then about 8 months later, Ronald Reagan decided to fire all the air traffic controllers. And if we didn't go on strike, if we went on strike, of course we would lose our job. And if we didn't go on strike and stayed working, all leave was canceled. We'd be working 80-hour work weeks. And so I had no choice but to lose my job, and went on to start a drop zone to produce some income. So it was some exciting times, for sure.
What other major changes have you seen? That's an administrative change, leadership change. Let's look at competition.
Well, competition it's crazy because, of course, there are classics, and we call them the classic events because that's what we started doing a long time ago, Style and Accuracy, and of course we did that for a long time. I remember distinctly at the 76 Nationals in Tahlequah, somebody from, I think, Pioneer showed up with a technique of opening device on the parachute, and he called it a slider. And I remember distinctly saying, that thing is going to kill people. There is no future in this sport for the slider. Of course, if you talk to anybody now, they don't know any other opening device except a slider. So I wasn't nearly as far-seeing as I would want him to have been. But in competition at the time, of course, we were then starting to do 10-man, and people saw the 10-man competition as the radicals, the long-hairs, the hippies, and there was a lot of it going on. Of course, Bill Newell started the SCR stuff on the West Coast, and about that same time, Jim Hooper and others were doing a lot of the really innovative stuff on the East Coast, and so there kind of became a competition between the coasts as to who was doing what when. And then we, of course, were doing four-way because most of the drop zones had 182s, and at the time we were using telemeters from the ground to do the scoring, so you didn't have free fall photography. And in fact, when they started doing free fall photography, the beta system was about as big as a check luggage at the airport, and so that was strapped to your chest, and the camera was slightly larger than a vacuum cleaner, so canister vacuum cleaner. So we slowly transitioned into moving from ground video to air video. Eddie Mosier, who was a part of the Exodus 10-way team from the Middle West, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana area, was on the board and convinced the competition committee that they should move from ground judging to air video. I was the chairman of the competition committee for the 3.5 years before I became president of USPA, and we were going through issues like the teams complaining that the Golden Knights kept coming and winning the meets. And so as a chairman, I thought rather than express my opinion, I would grab the leaders of the community and have them express their opinion. And we decided, based on Jerry Bird, Craig Frank, Al Kruger, Eddie Mosier, Mike Sherman, John Sherman, I mean, from the Exodus team, and Mike Treffer, Mike Johnson, people like that, that those teams that did really well, sometimes they'd lose to the Knights, sometimes they'd beat the Knights, is that they wanted to say, when I walk away and say I won, I want to say I beat everybody, not just I beat everybody but the Knights. So let the Knights continue to come and compete, and of course that's what's happened. The Knights are competitive, but they don't win every meet, and like Arizona Airspeed, Craig Girard, Mark Kirkby, that whole list of people that from Arizona Airspeed showed that we can find as good a sponsor as anybody can, and we can bring the game to town. So, so we went through the four-way track meet, the back loop, build a formation after that, and then try to do accuracy at the ground where you're trying to hit a target after you do an exit four-way back loop, and then we started adding. I mean, when I started skydiving, freestyle was a bad exit. Is that people come out and point their head straight down, and then they started doing turns on cue, and it was like they knew what they were doing. And of course they did, and they do, and they're absolutely unbelievable. But the competition now with freestyle and canopy piloting stuff, it's unbelievable where we've come in just a short period of time. The last 20 years has just been a huge, huge change. We're still doing the classics. I mean, especially in the World Military Championships, there 160 countries will show up, and they're all doing style and accuracy. So style and accuracy is not dead. It may be not as popular in the United States, especially style. The two military academies have stopped doing style, so that it's not being done at the collegiate championships like it used to be. But then they're doing really incredible four-way stuff and six-way stuff, and so it's just the competition is incredible from where it was to where it is now.
Where do you see the future?
You know, like I said, I told you that the slider had no future, so I'm probably the last person to predict where we're going, but it's just it's unbelievable the capability that we see in the sport now. And every one of them, every one of the disciplines. I believe that we call ourselves a sport because of the competition. If it wasn't for the competition, we'd just be a hobby, in my opinion. And so we seem to rotate around the idea of competition within the sport, and a lot of people don't do competition, but they understand it and they show up and they watch it and follow it, and so the nationals are a big part of what we do and why we do it. But it's really hard to say where we're going with it. It'd be crazy to say there aren't different disciplines that still haven't been brought into it, and the level is just It's unbelievable.
What's your insight as to how wind tunnels have changed?
Well, wind tunnels, I think, are a great teaching technique. But I believe that it's like, to an extent, it's kind of like base jumping in that it's kind of different than what we do. It's kind of what we do, but it is different. And the wind tunnel is a lot of fun if you've never been in one. I think everybody should spend some time on a wind tunnel because it's really exciting. It's a lot of fun, but it's different than skydiving. And so their purpose cannot be denied. The positive effect that they've had on student training is that, and probably therefore positively affecting the fatality and injury rate, is I think they're a great technique. But for the most part, I think that the world sees the wind tunnel as a form of entertainment, and that it's not necessarily an integral, necessary, cannot do without part of our sport. I'm glad they're out there, and there's more being built every day, and they're exciting and fun, but it's just different than skydiving. I made 2 jumps off El Capitan, so I understand base jumping, and I appreciate that, but it's like nitrate oxide in scuba diving. I don't understand it, and so therefore it's not fair to really express an opinion because I don't have a sufficient opinion to express. But base jumping to me is different, and when you truly are leaping off something that's 300 feet high with 1 parachute, it's to me it's not skydiving. It's something that is completely different than our sport. I've jumped out of helicopters and balloons, and those I can relate to because I've done them and I see how they compare, but base jumping to me is just a completely different animal.
Do you have an opinion about some of the new magazines? There's Blue Skies magazine, which is kind of filled a place.
Yeah, when Treffer was a really good friend of mine, and I was president when B.J. Worth brought his lawyer to the board meeting to convince the board that they were involved in a conflict of interest if they continued to let Mike Treffer be on the board and editor of Skydiving News Magazine. And I directed or requested that King Morton be the board's representative, and for him to have to review with our lawyer the situation so that we would have the issues placed before the board. Once again, the issue was that not only should Mike Treffer resign from the board because he is embroiled in a conflict of interest, but if he doesn't resign and the board continues to let him remain on the board, then the premise was that the board was in violation of their fiduciary responsibility to allow him to stay on the board, that if he didn't resign, he should be kicked off. And so the issue was, in my opinion, was, once again, it wasn't for me to make the decision, it was for me to present to the board the entire issue and let the board make the decision. Whatever the board made is what we would live with. And so the board listened to, her name was Carol Schauneberger, a good friend of mine, a lawyer from Denver, skydiver. She was living with Bob Taylor, BT, who was a great skydiver from the early days. And so Carol presented her opinion, her legal opinion to the board, and then King Morton introduced the lawyer that he brought on behalf of USPA, and he presented his side of the story, and then the board made the decision that Treffer was an entrepreneur who had the right to conduct his personal life the way he wanted to, and that his news magazine was meant to be another voice in the skydiving community, and that his involvement in that enterprise did not sufficiently affect his performance as a member of the USPA board. And therefore, the motion was made to kick him off the board, if you will, and the motion failed. And so Mike continued, and I had my problems with Mike, and like I say, but but he's like many others in the skydiving community, is that he's opinionated. He is an individual. He walks to his own beat. He's a great guy. As we just found out, an incredibly giving individual. It was Mike Treffer that started the United States Parachute Team Trust Fund. It was his idea to bring that to the board in about 1985 or so. And it was making money, so that there was a couple $100 that was given each team member when they went off to competition. But in his will, after he died from a skydiving accident, he left another $400,000, which almost doubled the strength of the fund. So Mike's heart was in skydiving. He died skydiving. It was his whole life. And when he decided, before he died, when he decided to stop doing the Skydiving News magazine, then Laura Kelson, who worked for USPA in the publication department, the communication department, she worked with a parachutist. She and Kola from Iceland actually considered buying it from Mike. And they talked to Mike, and Mike didn't want to, he didn't want to continue, and he didn't want it to be continued by anybody else. So there was no agreement reached. Whether they actually came to a discussion of dollars and cents, I'm not sure about that. But it was either decided that he didn't want it to be, or they didn't want it under those conditions. So they decided to start their own. And I don't especially agree with some of the things they present, and especially if you consider this to be a family sport, family community, is that I'm not big on tattoos and piercings and language. And so, but once again, I think that there should be opposition in all things. I think that you need, if you don't have sorrow, you really can't understand happiness. And maybe that's hokey, but I think that there is a place for that free speech and that free expression, and there are some in this community that do like that. And that doesn't detract from their ability to compete or to represent the sport or to contribute as delegates or members of the board of the community. So, I think there's a place for it. I think we are a small community, and so I don't think you can have a lot of those, but once again, it's that free enterprise system, and I'm glad they're there. I love Kola and Laura. I call her Techie Laura because she understands all that technical stuff, and they're absolutely really sweet people. But and they serve a purpose. So I'm glad they're there. Well, I think the idea of the museum is really exciting to me because I believe that we have so many great stories and we have so many incredible people involved in the sport over the years. Like I said, when you consider the personalities like Jacques Castell and Bill Otley and Lloyd Bryden, Coy McDonald, Spider Wren, oh my gosh, and pillars of the community like Mike Parnell, who started Oakley Glasses, and Craig Frank, and Al Kruger, and Joe Sveck was unbelievable, who contributed to the sport. There are so many pillars of the community that need to be given a chance to tell their stories and to have their pictures on the wall and the plaques about them available for people to read and that stuff. Andy Keach, Ray Cottingham, Ginny McCombs. I mean, the names just keep coming up that have contributed so much to the sport that there are those that are coming behind that need to have that attachment to where we were and to be able to relate to the difference between that and where we are now. And so for everybody out there to accept the idea that putting this in a building, one place where people who have jumped and The only other group that we recognize is those that are going to jump. Okay, there are no non-jumpers out there. There are just those that have jumped and those that are going to jump. And this would be the place to come, see, and relate, and be entertained, enjoy yourself, and be a part of it. And as Lenny Potts, another one of my heroes, who was the past president of the National Skydive Museum, said, we're all going to be in there. So just go see where your spot is and how you're going to relate to the rest of those heroes in the community. Lyle Cameron, Doc Fitch, Paul Tagg, Lyle Cameron. I mean, there's some unbelievable names from the past that really make up our history, and I think that the history is really now a result here in our present, and we have got a lot of people that should be involved in this, and I hope you guys will be a part of it. It's impossible to explain. Like I said, we ran the drop zone for about 15 years in Salt Lake, and it's just, we can show videos, we can talk until your ears are numb, but there's nothing like when that door opens and you are about to step out into space and use what you have learned on the ground to do what you cannot believe you just did in free fall. The parachute opens and you get to fly around looking down from the top, knowing that you're totally in control. It's just an experience that you cannot possibly relate to. You've got to do it to feel it. And it just, don't pass up the opportunity.